we can start now.
Maybe a few minutes for the attendees to fully sign in. Hello, everyone. I'm just giving like 1 more minute for us to have at least a few more of the attendees. We have like 37 right now. So that once I'm explaining about the interpretation, all of them will be able to connect. All right, let's begin. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, good evening, and welcome to the webinar. This is a webinar joint co-hosted between Indigenous Peoples Major Group and FIMI in the light of the high-level political forum this year, which is done online, of course, due to the current pandemic of the COVID-19. Just to let the participant know that there is Spanish and English interpretation. So please, once you join, kindly look at the option that you have that says interpretation. Select your language, your preferred language, and then also to listen to the interpreters, you have to select mute original audio. And once you do that, you'll be able to listen to the interpreters if somebody in English is speaking and you are a Spanish speaker. And that goes the same way for the English speakers as well. And secondly, if you have any question or any comment, you can send them. We have the 2 options. There is the chat box below your computers, and there is a question and answer box as well. If you have a question, it would be nice if you assign it to one of the speakers so that it will be easy for them to understand that that question is for them. And we will have enough time to respond to your questions. Each speaker will have 10 minutes. And of course, there will be a round of questions that they will have another minutes to respond to. And so now I want to go ahead and introduce you our moderator. Her name is Aveshnim Koti, and she works with Cultural Survivor. Cultural Survivor works toward the future and the respect and honors of Indigenous peoples, inherent right dynamic cultures, deeply and richly interwoven into land, languages, spiritual tradition, artistics, and the artistic expression. Aveshnim is from the Maya Quiche community in Guatemala, and she's the program manager in community media, and she's also she has a master's degree in sociology. She's a sociologist with a master's degree in public administration. She has an experience delivering and management of project programs and strengthening Indigenous people's self-governance. So Aveshnim, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Aminatu. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody.
I'm very honored to be invited to be moderating this panel. Thank you to FIMI and the Indigenous Peoples Major Group for Sustainable Development. Yes, I would like to first honor Mother Earth that is with us, and it's a great day today. For us at the north is the summer, for those of you that are in the south is the winter. And we need to be thankful for one more day of life and that our families are okay. And I hope that everybody is keeping safe during these hard times. So this panel is titled "We Have a Voice, We Have Rights, Indigenous Women, SDGs and COVID-19." And the purpose of this panel is to show the realities of Indigenous women in the different communities in different regions around the world. As you know, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals have been affected greatly during this pandemic. We hear in the news how there's going to be a recession, an economic recession, and we hear a lot about the economy and how the economy is being balanced between the safety of the people and the economy. But we do not hear about the recession in Sustainable Development Goals. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, we look at the 17 goals, and all of them are very interwoven. Today, we are going to talk mainly about two main goals, which is gender equality, how to empower gender equality, but also how to diminish inequalities, which is two of the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals, and all the goals that surround them, because all of them are interwoven. Today we're going to hear from great women that I have a lot of admiration for, and we're going to start with Ms. Tarsila Rivera Sea. I'm going to introduce her and then give the floor. Tarsila Rivera Sea is a Quechua activist from Ayacucho, Peru. She has spent more than 30 years to defend and seek recognition of Peru's indigenous cultures and peoples. She's the founder of the permanent workshop of Andean and Amazonian Indigenous Women from Peru, Chirapac, Center of Indigenous Cultures for Peru, and the Continental Network of Indigenous Women, ECMIA. She has participated in international forums in Nairobi, Cairo, Beijing, and Durban, and in the United Nations Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues, UNFPI. In 2011, Tarsila was recognized by Ford Foundation as an extraordinary global leader. In 2012, she was appointed as a member of the Civil Council Global Advisory of the United Nations Women. Tarsila was elected as a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues for the period of 2017-2019. Currently, she's the chairperson of Chirapac, Center of Indigenous Cultures from Peru, and president of the Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI. So the floor is for you, Tarsila.
Muy buenos días, hermanas, hermanos de aquí y de las diferentes regiones que nos escuchan. Es para nosotras, como mujeres indígenas del mundo, porque a través de FIMI estamos todas las mujeres indígenas del mundo pensando, soñando y tratando de actuar para ser visibles, para ser reconocidas en nuestras justas capacidades y reconocidas en nuestros aportes también, para la solución de problemas y para contribuir a que el escenario donde nos encontremos, sea nacional, internacional o global, sepa y conozca nuestros aportes y nuestra convicción por la lucha de un mundo justo e incluyente. Con estas palabras quisiera agradecer esta oportunidad siempre de llegar a ustedes, a nuestra hermana moderadora y a todo el equipo de FIMI que hace el esfuerzo de ponernos siempre en vitrina y tener esta interacción con nuestro pueblo, con nuestras hermanas y hermanos. En ese sentido, quisiera empezar diciendo que en el mundo, según el último estudio de la OIT, ya somos casi 480 millones la población indígena, ¿no? Las mujeres seríamos alrededor de 238, 240 millones. Y los varones vienen a ser más o menos 238, 239 millones. En mi región, América Latina, se da también alrededor de 55 millones como población. Y las mujeres indígenas estamos alrededor de 28 millones. Entonces, este contexto de la pandemia nos ha abierto un escenario en el que no solamente las mujeres y los pueblos indígenas hemos sido ya objeto e impactadas en mayor situación, en mayor grado por la pandemia y por el impacto del virus. Pero lo más importante es que ha mostrado al mundo uno de los primeros, las primeras conclusiones que tenemos a nivel global, que los pueblos y las mujeres indígenas, tanto del área rural como urbano marginal, por la migración del campo a la ciudad, ha podido ser mostrada a través de los medios sobre la situación de exclusión en la que estamos los pueblos indígenas. Las políticas públicas de nuestros países tienen una agenda pendiente con nosotras para los servicios de salud, para el acceso a la sanidad básica y sobre todo relacionando los dos aspectos que tienen que ver con la salud y la educación, todavía no acceso a los medios. Diciendo esto, quiero también compartir con ustedes que FIMI ha hecho un esfuerzo de recoger información de las hermanas del mundo para saber cuál ha sido el impacto real y próximamente se compartirán estos resultados. Lo importante de este estudio es que son aportes de las propias mujeres desde sus comunidades y desde las propias experiencias. Y son más o menos generales y representativos a nivel mundial. En el que, por supuesto, la salud personal, física, la salud emocional, la salud de nuestra madre tierra y la salud medioambiental es la que tiene un espacio prioritario como afectado e impactado. Porque lamentablemente en estas condiciones, casi en la mayoría de países, la dinámica económica, por ejemplo, del impuesto por los estados, como las industrias extractivas, no han estado en cuarentena. Y este contexto ha llevado también a otro aspecto muy doloroso para las mujeres indígenas, las jóvenes y las niñas, que es haber sido y ser objeto de violencia de todo tipo. Poniendo como ejemplo, en el caso de Perú, cómo es que en este contexto de cuarentena hay más de 350 violaciones a niñas y niños por los propios, digamos, familiares. Es doloroso. El otro ejemplo que me gustaría poner en este contexto es la violación de niña en Verá de Colombia de 13 años, violada sexualmente por militares. Todo esto a nosotras nos indigna, nos duele, nos lleva a levantar la voz porque no es posible seguir callando sobre cómo impacta en situaciones de pandemia a las mujeres indígenas en mayor medida que a las demás y a los demás. En ese sentido, tenemos la Agenda 2030, que viene a ser una esperanza y una oportunidad. Y para eso las mujeres indígenas nos venimos preparando, los pueblos indígenas nos venimos preparando, y justamente este escenario que tenemos de conversar en el contexto del High Level Political Forums en estos días, en este mes, nos debe llevar a unir voces de lo local a lo global, porque en el escenario global se aprueban compromisos para que los estados lo puedan cumplir, pero tenemos un gran desafío, que las recomendaciones y los acuerdos que los estados deben cumplir están todavía en la agenda pendiente. Por eso el desafío nuestro y el desafío de los estados es justamente pensar, planificar, diseñar, concretando en qué medida y cómo y con qué recursos vamos a implementar los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, en el que, como se ha mencionado antes, los pueblos y las mujeres indígenas estamos incluidas casi en la totalidad de los ODS, ¿no? En este caso, solamente relacionamos lo que corresponde a los objetivos más importantes que tienen que ver con este contexto, que se ha en realidad deteriorado y ha impactado nuestras vidas, como tiene que ver el ODS, por ejemplo, específicamente con lo que recomendaron, lo que se mencionó, el tema de las desigualdades, la desigualdad, el ODS 10, el de igualdad de género en el caso nuestro, pero desde un enfoque intercultural y desde la interseccionalidad indígena, por ejemplo, y cultural, que tiene que ver con el ODS 5. Se habla mucho del trabajo. ¿Ya estamos cumpliendo?
No, perdón, es que estamos teniendo un problema con la traducción, entonces los que quieren escucharla en inglés no están pudiendo. Entonces, denos un chancecito para poder arreglarlo.
Y eso que estoy hablando despacio.
Vamos a esperar un segundo y vamos a esperar luz verde de parte de Aminatu.
Please, to all the English speakers, while Dona Tarsilia is speaking, go to the option where it says interpretation. Select the language which you prefer, which is English. Then also click on mute original audio. If you don't click that, then you will not listen to the interpretation. But once you click on mute original audio, then you will listen just to the interpreters and not to Dona Tarsila. I don't know if that is clear. Can anyone try it and confirm if the interpretation is okay now? Thank you.
Okay, so we did get some confirmations. Aminatu, can we continue?
Yes, we have somebody who said it's okay. So we can continue.
Bueno, gracias. Entonces, para contextualizar los ODS con el impacto de la pandemia, estaba haciendo referencia a los ODS que directamente están relacionados, como el ODS 8, por ejemplo, que tiene que ver con el trabajo digno, que ha sido fuertemente impactado por ejemplo, por las medidas del gobierno de no salir, de no tener, por ejemplo, actividad económica. Entonces creo que en toda nuestra región y en el mundo donde ha habido cuarentenas hemos tenido que recibir quejas y expresiones de cómo la autogeneración de actividades económicas por las mujeres indígenas y rurales ha sido fuertemente impactado y no ha permitido, por ejemplo, continuar su actividad económica para mantener a la familia y por lo tanto se deteriora y se va en contra del ODS 8 que tiene que ver con el trabajo digno. El tema de la salud y bienestar que tiene que ver con el ODS 3 es lo que hablaba al principio. O sea, si las mujeres indígenas y los pueblos indígenas no hubieran recurrido a sus conocimientos propios, a usar sus propios recursos para responder, por ejemplo, en este contexto de nuevas enfermedades, tendríamos de repente un mayor impacto de muertes en comunidades. Entonces, la estrategia que tienen las propias comunidades de cerrar fronteras, de hacer que las personas retornantes se queden en comunidades alejadas hasta que realmente pasen los días de no peligro, ha hecho que, por ejemplo, en muchas comunidades haya menos contagio. Sin embargo, estamos presenciando que las comunidades más afectadas y que trasciende por los medios, gracias a la solidaridad internacional, son las comunidades y los pueblos amazónicos, donde realmente hay menos posibilidad de enfrentar este tipo de virus porque sus condiciones de salud y físicas no están preparadas para recibir este tipo de pandemias y entonces hay un mayor riesgo y que duele al mundo porque tenemos países donde justamente las comunidades viven alejadas y el Estado no tiene presencia, pero sí decide qué hacer con los recursos de la región y con las concesiones para explotar el petróleo, el oro o los bosques. Entonces, estos son contrasentidos que se tienen en nuestra región. Relacionando el ODS 4, por ejemplo, en relación a la educación, tendríamos que decir que el Estado y el mundo viene comentando felizmente sobre la brecha que hay en relación a la conectividad en las comunidades indígenas y la falta de acceso a medios modernos de comunicación e información, tanto herramientas como las Wi-Fi, para recibir educación, la teleeducación. Entonces, todavía tenemos comunidades donde lo más, digamos, moderno sería un altoparlante o un teléfono básico o un teléfono público en la comunidad. Entonces, ¿cómo se puede decir que vamos a hacer teleeducación a nivel nacional cuando muchas comunidades no tienen electricidad, no tienen internet, no tienen televisor y menos las tablets? Entonces, viene a ser todavía una agenda pendiente también cuando hablamos en las soluciones que muchas veces da el Estado. El otro aspecto básico que tiene que ver con la alimentación, la salud también es la soberanía alimentaria, la seguridad alimentaria. El ODS 2, por ejemplo, se ve totalmente afectada porque rompe con la dinámica agrícola y de producción y de intercambio de alimentos desde las comunidades hacia afuera. En ese sentido, vemos que en muchos casos las familias han recurrido, por ejemplo, a hacer intercambios, a compartir de acuerdo a los productos que tienen para poder apoyar a las familias que no lo tienen para enfrentar los temas de falta de alimentos. En ese sentido, creemos que hay mucho por hacer para el futuro porque mientras históricamente los pueblos y las mujeres indígenas hemos respondido a desafíos que tienen que ver con los problemas sociales, con las carencias, pero también con la no inclusión en las políticas públicas, pues de igual manera esas capacidades son la base para contribuir a la superación de los problemas posteriores que nos deja esta pandemia. En ese sentido, creemos que las estrategias que ya las mujeres indígenas hemos venido aplicando en las comunidades tienen que servir para que sean incluidas en las políticas públicas, pero también nosotras llegar mejor articuladas, mejor preparadas, mejor informadas para que el Estado incluya las políticas que son pendientes en los aspectos básicos para nuestros países, que tiene que ver con el reconocimiento a la tierra, el territorio y los recursos de los pueblos indígenas y mujeres indígenas, incluirnos a las indígenas en los programas de erradicación de las desigualdades, las oportunidades de educación y de trabajo para nosotras, pero también para la nueva generación, para acceder a trabajo digno, incluir en las políticas de redistribución de los fondos públicos en aspectos que tienen que ver con la educación desde la comunidad hacia los estamentos superiores. De otra manera, podríamos tener todavía barreras para el ejercicio pleno de nuestros derechos y la participación pública, de participación política. Con esto termino solo llamándoles que el racismo tiene que ser erradicado como una ideología que se usa desde el ejercicio del poder en todo el mundo. Gracias.
Gracias, doña Tarsila. Y disculpe la interrupción. Pasamos desde Latinoamérica hacia el continente de África. Y voy a cambiar a inglés. So we're moving from Latin America to Africa. Thank you so much, doña Tarsila. And sorry for the interruption. So we have a question for Ms. Lucy Mulenke. Could you please highlight some of the impacts of COVID-19 on local communities and the role of Indigenous women to maintain peace? And actually, before you answer the question, I would like to give a little bit of introduction for Lucy Mulenke. She's a Maasai woman from Kenya. Ms. Mulenke grew up grew up and schooled in the rural Maasai land. After her high school, she joined a government media house as a broadcast journalist, focusing on issues related to environment and development. After 17 years, she left and joined the Indigenous Information Network as the executive director, where she works currently. She's a graduate of Gender and Development Studies from University of Nairobi in Kenya. Ms. Mulenke has carried many hats. She is a co-founder of the Indigenous Women's Biodiversity Network, along with Florina Lopez from Panama, one of the founder members of the African Indigenous Women's Organization, IWO, and the International Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI. She is the African Regional Coordinator of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and the chair of GEF Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, IPAC, among many other roles that she holds. So continuing with the question, Ms. Lucy, could you please highlight some of the impacts of COVID-19 on local communities and the role of Indigenous women to maintain peace?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, everyone. Tarsila, thank you for speaking a lot of things that are almost related to our continent. And as I was listening to you, I thought, well, for Indigenous people, when we want to go up, we have to go through, climb up through the mountain in the rough side of the mountain, because it seems like there are so many obstacles within the way. And those obstacles are, you clearly explain to them. And when I look at Africa and I look at also the challenges that you've mentioned, these are the same challenges that we've been able to have an impact on, especially looking at COVID-19. And when the COVID was announced, even though it started, it was first in December in China, but for the rest of the globe, especially Africa, people started really paying attention to it from mid-March and so on. And one of the most challenges that we've had as Indigenous people, and even for us who are okay, we can say we advance in different ways, we didn't get the real, what was this virus? What was it all about? Nobody really knew exactly. And that is even worse for the remote communities, that they didn't even have awareness. They didn't know what was coming through and why suddenly people were told not to move around, to stick into one place, and there was a lockdown. There were strict measures that were put in place without any knowledge of explaining to the people that this is what is happening and we have this and that. And again, as just like Tarsila has said, people, most of the remote communities and even their local communities, some of them don't even have time to listen to radio. They don't even have television to see. Though they have mobile phones, they can hear when you call them, but many of them, especially women, can go reading messages and be able to know what exactly is happening. So there was a big challenge in that. The other big problem which was there, it was that the movement was limited. And as you know, Indigenous people, they have their own system, they have their own calendar, they have their own ways of doing different things. But suddenly here they were told you cannot move from this area to the other. So those were some of the challenges that really got them by surprise before even they prepared to know how they can continue with their life in the lockdowns and so on. In most of the countries also, like in my country, Kenya, we had a curfew where it was only limited, go on, but at a certain time, you can't move. That also was a big challenge for them. The other big challenge was that despite the fact that there was a lockdown and so on, people were not prepared to be able to stock maybe like basic needs that they need. So there was a lot of challenge, and up to now, there's still a lot of challenge to access some of the important basic needs that they need. And people are even scared, like to go to hospitals and seek for any help and so on. And one of the other biggest challenge we have also among the other communities, not only to the women, we also found out that there was this conflict among the communities themselves, among the same tribe, the same speaking communities, and also even from the neighborhood and so on. And these conflicts really have brought a lot of problems to the communities. In places like Cameroon, we saw that the people were even displaced, and they went to stay in internally displaced camps, which is not really good for them at that particular time when they need to be together as a family and to be able to handle the COVID in good with their own people. There was also some people who lost property. We have also young children we lost because this time almost all the schools in many countries are closed, and finding that the young men who are in school, when there is a conflict like that, they want to run and also participate, and yet they don't have those skills. And in some of the countries, we lost those young people, which is very sad indeed. One of the other things that also is brought within the conflict and also with COVID, because of people staying together, the issue of poverty, the issue of anxiety, the issue of really unstable families getting together because of economic problems, was the gender-based violence that has come up very, very strongly. It's not only in Latin America, it's almost in all of Africa. We have different stories from South Africa. Our colleagues were telling us of how one young lady was killed by the so-called husband. And the two young children were left there for the grandmother to look after when the man was arrested and so on, because he killed her and just ran away. We have so many other women who are abused left and right in different places, rape cases, domestic violence within the families, losing children, and also different communities having their own problems together. And so these conflicts are not only in one country. We've had lots of conflict among the other groups in different countries. I can mention Mali, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, and Sudan, and many others, even within our own country, Kenya. But we also must say that the governments are trying as much as they can, despite the fact that there is also a lot of complication, because it looks like all the governments now are focusing only on the COVID and really forgetting that there are also some other important things that need to be checked on, especially on the issue of education. That has really brought more stress to the communities and to the women, because here are children who are still at home. For example, in my country, they say they will not open any schools until January. And you can imagine containing those young girls, those young children at home and so on. You have to be alert. So it brings a lot of stress to the women. But one important thing is that I want really to salute women, indigenous women in Africa. They have really done a lot of good work. They have tried to make sure that they contain their families, and that's the richness and the pride of indigenous women in Africa, because they carry the heaviest load, and they're still the heroines in terms of looking after the family and putting them together despite all the problems of gender-based violence, losing families, early marriages, early forced marriages, and so on, and pregnancies among youth and so on. But they've been trying as much as possible to make sure that they really hold the family together. They get together to be able to make sure that their families are intact and so on. And have also been taking the role of training the community. They have been taking themselves the role of picking up their facilities and training the communities to be able to really manage the COVID, as what the governments and the Ministry of Health tell us, to provide, to make sure that there is water. Because those are some of the basic needs that you tell people to wash their hands. These communities are in remote areas. They don't have those facilities. They can't access the water as soon as the ones who are in other urban centers. So they've really been doing a lot of work. And as Tarsila also mentioned, what FIMI has been doing, and other partners like Madre and so on, Pawanka and the rest, who have been also, and other donors, I can't name all of them, who have been actually providing some little funding to make sure that these women can go into their communities and be able to provide some services by creating awareness and training the communities to be able to manage the COVID-19 despite all those that we have mentioned. Now, coming to the Sustainable Development Goals. This is important, and I think Tarsila really did explain quite well. And thank you for breaking it down. And one of the important things that I must say, that for the indigenous peoples, and especially even for us in Africa, our women, they live in very, very remote areas, whereby despite the fact that we have different policies in place, and also we have different systems in different countries in Africa. And if I give my example of my country, where we have devolution and we have counties and different governments in those counties, there is still a gap in that remote communities have not been reached in terms of really being able to participate fully in the SDGs. But one important thing is that the organizations working within those communities, the indigenous organizations, have also tried as much as possible to make sure that they reach them. And mainstream sustainable development goals, especially goal number 1 up to 6, which are very, very crucial to us. The rest are also important, but we have to go step by step to make sure that our communities, and especially the women, do understand. Train them, and then they'll be able to know that they can, whatever they do and whatever step they take, may it be on poverty, alleviating poverty, issues of hunger, by making sure that they provide food for the community and have good systems of farming, organic, and make sure that they have kitchen gardens to feed their children. Many of them also in other parts of Africa, those who are pastoralists, have also used that opportunity to make sure that they teach the other women to make things like yogurt. Just innovations that they've been having are amazing. And that's why I really salute them, because they have been doing so much work. They have taken this time of lockdown to make sure that they train each other, they talk to each other. And even for the NGOs who are working with them, make sure that they keep talking to them by phone, by conducting them, so that the women can continue feeling that they are recognized and their work that they are doing is very important to them. For Kenya, we've been also, and other colleagues in Africa, we've been following the SDG process, both at the national level and the regional level. And a lot has been done, and reports have been written. And right now, within this week, there's a lot of presentations going on, and different of us are taking part in making sure that we listen to see and to make sure we are included in most of the processes that are going on. And I thank a lot my country, Kenya, because we have really moved very fast and making sure that no one is left behind. But despite the fact that no one is left behind, we still have that among the indigenous people. There's still a lot to be done and to be followed. So it's quite a challenge in terms of looking at the different kind of activities that we are looking at. And we must say that we have,
sorry for your time is,
we have
sorry.
yeah, we have to have a voice. We have to keep that voice going. I've been timing myself. I think I have about 1 minute to go. We have a voice, and I think we really must make sure that that voice is heard. Despite the fact that if I'm stepping here myself, I must remember behind that there are people there behind me who cannot be able to step where I'm stepping, and we must bring those voices up there to be able to be listened to, many of us. So I really do thank everyone and thank all the support that we have, and we continue having these discussions because they help us also to learn, and you learn from us, and we are able to advance as indigenous peoples, as indigenous women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lucy. And now we have our third and final panelist, Eleanor Dictaan Bangoa. She's a Cantanat Igorot from the Philippines. She's the coordinator of the Indigenous Women's Program of Terteba Work and focuses on ensuring Indigenous women's perspectives and so that it ensures that the movement's perspectives and concerns are reflected in the overall work of the TEBA, framed under the Indigenous people's self-determined development, where Indigenous women is a relevant component. Work revolves around the gender empowerment of Indigenous peoples' organizations and communities in different formats, for example, capacity building, project facilitation, and advocacy, among others. The question for you, Ms. Eleanor, is in light with SDG Global Agenda, could you share with us the assessment report on Indigenous women's struggle with the current COVID-19 pandemic? What are some of the plans and strategies to effectively engage Indigenous women from Asia? Thank you.
Thank you. And good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone around the globe. I was thinking of giving a brief background, but with a limited time, maybe I'll go directly into the findings of a very brief or quick, a very rapid assessment we did on Indigenous peoples actually in Asia, but with some focus also on women, no? So we did this for involving 4 countries in Asia: Nepal, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia. Plus we added from our monitoring reports from partners on their situation on this pandemic time, no? So against a backdrop of poverty in Asia among indigenous peoples is very high. There's also an issue of non-citizenship. A lot of indigenous peoples are still not holding national identity cards. There are also very big there are also issues of demographic engineering. There's rising authoritarianism and militarism, and of course the persistent patriarchy among indigenous peoples. No, this is the backdrop against which we are trying to look into the impact of the pandemic into indigenous women's lives. No, with this very brief assessment. No, so in Asia, according to a COVID risk assessment, based on national data, Asia is supposed to be a medium risk region, no, in relation to the impacts of COVID-19, except Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. But where indigenous peoples are generally not recognized and not reflected in the data, such medium risk category tends to obscure the realities on the ground, realities that are supposed to be addressed not only during this pandemic, but in the long term by the SDG targets like poverty, health, and livelihoods. Persisting realities aggravated or adversely impacted by the pandemic include racism and discrimination. No? This was earlier mentioned by Tarsila, but I would like to point out for the experience for Asia, it exposed and heightened the more vulnerable position of indigenous women based on sex. No? Of the 22 documented incidences of racist attacks in indigenous peoples in Northeast India, for example, between February to March, 14 involved indigenous women and youth. There were also reports of multiple discrimination from workplace to residence, aside from the hazardous work conditions and unsympathetic administration by Naga, this was coming from the Naga women. No? This has pushed the situation, which is very hostile, has pushed 300 Naga women nurses to go home. This is aside from the stories of spitting on people spitting on them, calling them coronavirus, corona or virus, and the other stories of young workers getting stranded, hunger, and some even I think there was a case of a young girl dying on the way. Social justice. Indigenous women are less likely to receive timely, appropriate, and adequate information about COVID-19 and its mitigating measures, relief, emergency relief, cash or health benefits, and other social protection measures due to its pre-existing conditions of marginalization and invisibility. These are emerging from the lack of national identity documents. Again, this is emphasized, the lack of citizenship, where in Thailand alone, there is an estimate of 100,000 indigenous peoples reportedly without citizenship. A lot of them are women, no? being considered as second-class citizens. Most of these indigenous peoples without identity cards are women. It also comes from the lack of basic social service infrastructures, facilities, and service providers, and the equipments in IP communities, which are usually in rural and geographically isolated areas. This includes, of course, communications, transportation, education, health services, and market, among others. No? So if you can think of Hua Ikang village in Thailand, which is the nearest health center is around 5 kilometers away. And this health center is catering to 19 villages without a full-time doctor and necessary medical equipment. That noting that Thailand is a relatively more advanced country in the region. No? So access to healthcare entails cost, a lot cost in terms of finances and productive time, so much needed by indigenous women. There's also been stigma from the disease and punitive measures. No, reflect as you may. The case of the Lisu volunteer was penalized 5,000 baht for allegedly violating community quarantine rules in Thailand, and the woman caught without face mask who were exposed under the sun in Maguindanao, Philippines, speak of the unreasonable and excessive punitive measures putting indigenous peoples at a very disadvantaged positions. These measures are also observed in relation to access to food. Hungry people in Nepal, for example, the young boys who went fishing in the Narayani River were arrested and charged 5,000 Nepali rupees. A few weeks later, there were reports of 100 already arrested for the same offense and imposed fines of 10,000 Nepali rupees per person. Also, next, the weakness. The pandemic also revealed the weaknesses in state health services in the outbreak of preventable communicable diseases like measles in Nepal and dengue and chikungunya in Thailand. Further, the exhaustion of health service providers and facilities from the rising COVID-19 infection also reflects how fragile our health systems and services are in the region. In the medium and long term, progress achieved in the health sector like maternal and health care, child health, may be pushed back unless effective interventions in health, poverty alleviation, and livelihoods are implemented soonest. In Nepal, for example, maternal death has reportedly decreased from 900 1 in 1990 to 239 deaths per 1,000 live births in 2015. The state targeted 70 per 100,000 deaths this year. But during the 2-month lockdown, the government reported a 200% increase in maternal death, with an average of 3 women dying every day across Nepal. This was mentioned earlier. Another one is the part of the other health-related issues in relation to this, to the COVID-19, is the increased incidences of gender-based violence. As mentioned, I think this was discussed earlier by the, Doña Tarsila and Lucy, Sister Lucy. In the area of food security and livelihoods, the observation is that the longer term effect of the pandemic on food security is more worrying to women. With the agricultural cycle disrupted, food and seed stocks may not last long with the prolonged restrictions. Power of indigenous peoples in general, further impacting adversely on the health-seeking behavior, access to education, and other security. Again, this has disproportionate impacts to women. Interestingly, there is a constant observation among indigenous peoples' organizations across countries that food security, at least in the short and medium terms, are not much of a concern for indigenous communities who have relative control and are able to access their traditional lands and resources. The most vulnerable to food shortage and hunger are those communities who have lost control and use of their lands and resources. This is similarly echoed in the area of livelihoods and income sources, where indigenous communities increasingly depend on labor and market-based income sources without opportunities for alternative livelihood. Higher risks to food shortage have been observed. No? This exposes indigenous peoples to negative coping strategies, like the reported cases of indigenous families who started selling off their lands to corporate entities who have taken advantage of the situation. Other potential negative coping strategies with adverse impact to women may be the resort to child labor and sex trafficking, including forced surrogacy, which has been reported as illicit but a lucrative activity in India, Cambodia, Laos, and Nepal. I short of time. So some of the those are just some. Another on food security, health, and everything. There's also one point on aggressive state and state facilitated development projects, which continued, no, despite the pandemic, no, to the disadvantage of indigenous communities who cannot proactively respond. This includes a lot of development projects like hydropower dams, mines. It also includes logging and hacking of indigenous lands by third parties, no, either migrants or corporate entities. On a different note, the pandemic was an opportunity to revive, transfer, and strengthen indigenous healthcare systems and practices, heavily interwoven with indigenous spirituality and consistent with the national guidelines. Across countries, indigenous lockdown practices were imposed as communities mobilized indigenous healthcare knowledge and management practices to level up community resistance. Resistance, yes. Spirituality is an essential component. We should highlight that spirituality is an essential component in indigenous concept of well-being, thus the accompanying rituals to healthcare. Protection and healing from these diseases for IPs are not only physical and individualized, but are community concerns. Well-being invokes the propitiation for the unseen through rites and rituals, which are symbolic of the collective accountability in the prevention, protection, and recovery from ill health. From these are just some of the findings we wanted to share and highlight in this space, and some as to plans and strategies. We believe that indigenous women are at the we indigenous women are at the forefront of healthcare, no, and management, whether this be in the indigenous stream or indigenous or mainstream arena, no, corollary to their care and nurture roles. Experiences from the COVID-19 pandemic highlights the compatibility or reinforcing relations between indigenous and mainstream healthcare knowledge, and the significance of indigenous community practice in sustaining the health of humankind and the environment. No?
Thank you.
I can I have
Thank you.
5 seconds? We will continue to promote, advocate, monitor, and push for progress in the inclusion of indigenous women in the SDGs at different arenas and levels of our capacities. Particularly, we will assert the recovery from pandemic requires a holistic approach that is inclusive and gender responsive, culturally appropriate, based on respect for collective human rights, and sustains the integrity of nature for the future. Inclusive, because women and children, youth, elderly, and LGBTQIs, and persons with disabilities are generally marginalized. Gender responsive, because patriarchy is a persistent barrier to effective recognition and advancement of women and non-binary persons, even in our own indigenous communities. Culturally appropriate, because global and national strategies are usually not sensitive to indigenous peoples and the gender differences within. Rights-based, because indigenous peoples are still suffering the continuing impacts of historical discrimination, and the inequalities unveiled by COVID-19 reflect this continuing gap in all development initiatives, including the SDG targets, disproportionately impacting indigenous women and their communities. And lastly, sustainable, because we owe it to our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you to all panelists. And I'm sorry that I'm cutting the time, but it's the time that we have assigned for each speaker. And I know that you have way more things that we would like to hear, but our time is on us, you know. So right now we are going to prepare for the questions and answer period. And I'm going to invite participants, please, to put up the questions in the chat box that says Q&A. If you look at your Zoom, you're probably familiar with this. If you can please write your question, and if you would like to indicate who would you like from the panelists to answer such question, it will be great, and we will hear from you. Okay, so we have a question. Thank you, Aminatu. The first question is, would you like to mention briefly specific actions from the states, for example, urgent decrees by government for indigenous peoples for each region? So if we want, we can move from Tarsila, Lucy, and Eleanor, please. Briefly, please. Doña Tarsila, would you like to go first?
Específicamente, ¿cuál era la pregunta?
La pregunta era...
¿O es sobre mi comentario?
No, la pregunta es, ¿cuáles son las acciones específicas de parte de los estados para los pueblos indígenas en su región? Como por ejemplo decretos o políticas públicas o algunos protocolos específicos para pueblos indígenas en el caso de COVID.
Mire, en el caso de Perú, después de 2 meses, y porque hemos levantado la voz y protestado, recién reaccionó el Estado específicamente para pueblos indígenas y con programas de apoyo alimentario y lo demás. Y protocolos, los protocolos oficiales no funcionan en las comunidades. Las comunidades han desarrollado su propio protocolo de seguridad. En el caso, por ejemplo, de Brasil, ha sido terrible porque ahí es todavía mucho más aislados y ya ustedes reciben toda la información de Brasil y también se ha tenido que levantar mucho la voz para pensar en algo. Ahora creo que algo hay, pero la información que se recibe desde las comunidades es que generalmente en las zonas rurales la gente sigue haciendo su vida cotidiana y lo que más les molesta es la privación del traslado. Pero recién está llegando la información en su real dimensión a comunidades alejadas. O sea que la barrera de la comunicación ha sido un problema y han empezado a tener alerta cuando han habido comunidades de las ciudades que han querido retornar a las comunidades y entonces el cierre de la entrada a estas comunidades, que era una prevención propia, en algunos casos han sido muy efectivos, ¿no? Entonces, desde el Estado hay algunas iniciativas, pero lo peor es que el Estado desconoce ese gran sector y no ha sabido responder en su momento y por no reconocimiento de derechos, como el caso de Brasil y el caso de gran parte de la Amazonía, pero también en el caso de Estados Unidos, por ejemplo. Ustedes saben que Arizona ha sido y el pueblo navajo ha sido el mayor golpeado con el coronavirus. Y comprobar que en reservas de las comunidades de Arizona, por ejemplo, están casi en peor situación que en algunas zonas de Centro y Sudamérica. O sea, esta pandemia lo que hace es enfrentarnos a nosotros, a la realidad y a los decisores de política.
Gracias, doña Tarsila. Lucy, do you mind answering the question? The question is, what are the specific actions by the states, for instance, decrees of emergency or public policies for indigenous peoples in your region?
For Africa, I think even though there are so many policies that are in place, there is still a gap in terms of those implementation of those policies, as many of you are looking at them. But there are quite a number of other problems that come along, and the government have really been trying as much as possible to make sure that all the citizens of the countries are really involved, like in terms of the respecting the curfew, the lockdown is respected and so on. And also in some of the areas, there is a help that has come around in terms of helping in supplying food and giving the community some of the food. But that is only happening in areas where there are urban centers where people can be able to reach. But those who are in remote areas continue with their own business just to, they continue. And when the government sees that nobody complains, nobody will reach them out and try to see that they have also as equal rights as the others. So that's where the biggest challenge is, because the communities really mind their own business and they don't want to get involved by mixing up with many people because of the way people have already taken up the coronavirus. The way the information has gone is like, this is a very serious thing and you should not even go near that person from Nairobi or from an urban centers where they give every, figures every other day. So those are some of the challenges. And in terms of the communities also, like the government has not been able to really look at the way when the lockdown was put, where were these people? We have urban indigenous people. Most of them tried as much as possible to go back to the countryside to stay there. But those who were left in the cities were also left with their own other problems. So there's still a few other things that really need to be taken up, and we urge our governments to really see how we can. But it's all for us indigenous people also to be able to raise their voice. If you don't have any representative in those particular areas in the government or in administration, then nobody will ever hear you or be able to reach you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Eleanor, if you don't mind answering the question.
In Asia, well, for at least the Philippines that we looked at, for the countries that we looked at, Indonesia has its national response and mitigation plan for COVID-19. This is almost kind of policy is almost all over the countries in Asia. No, in the Philippines, the version is the Bayanihan to Heal as One policy, which is, if you look at the policy, is not discriminative. You don't see, because it's craft it's supposed to be for everyone. But again, I will echo Lucy in saying that the discrimination comes in the process of implementation, no, because of the pre-existing biases and discrimination that indigenous peoples are already in, no. For Thailand, for example, one of its COVID amelioration policies is the universal, the UCS. It's a social security policy that's supposed to include indigenous peoples, or what it calls the ethnic minorities. It's expanding to ethnic minorities. But in reality, when indigenous peoples try to access it, they could not, because they do not have the appropriate identity card to be able to access it. Again, it's going back to the very basic question of identity cards for indigenous peoples. There's a very, very basic question of recognition, no? However, Indonesia's policy is quite interesting, and there can be hope here, no? It explicitly identifies non-pharmaceutical interventions and community engagement as vital components in implementing this plan. So this is some area where indigenous women in Indonesia can maximize and test how far does it really include indigenous women, no? Thailand also has Thailand has revived its Thailand and the Philippines that we reviewed revived their mechanisms in response to the SARS epidemic earlier, so that there are mechanisms for local monitoring. At the village level, there are people assigned to do the monitoring, reporting, and information dissemination. And it worked for this COVID-19 pandemic, but of course there's a lot of lapses. But in Thailand is quite interesting, because it really put money into the village health volunteers to really do their work, go house to house, gave them a quota of houses to serve. They have a certain number of houses to serve, so that information, monitoring, and reporting is done properly with the clientele, no? So this is something we see that can be maximized as well by indigenous women, who are at the forefront of community health, and who themselves know who the community members are, and the status of their health, no? Given proper training and resources, they may be able to do it and integrate traditional medicinal practice and knowledge. These are some of the interesting things we found. Of course, there are some interesting things found in Nepal as well, but I think I will forgo that for now.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question is for Doña Tarsila, and that's about, Doña Tarsila, la pregunta para ustedes, si se ha pensado en algún tipo de sistema de recolección de información regional de acuerdo a este nuevo contexto y las limitaciones de comunicación a nivel comunitario.
Regionalmente nosotros recogemos información desde las organizaciones, porque en las Américas el enlace continental tiene organizaciones representativas nacionales dentro de cada país. Es así como recabamos la información a través de las organizaciones y hacemos seguimiento. Sin embargo, desde el Estado es lo que nos hace falta, incidir frente al Estado para que los datos sobre mujeres indígenas, juventud y niñas indígenas o pueblos indígenas estén desagregados en los datos oficiales del Estado. Porque lo que nos ha demostrado esta pandemia es que no tienen datos visibles. Por ejemplo, como ha pasado en la mayoría de países, transmitir información pensando solo en lo urbano, pensar en los bonos económicos solo en los que aparecen en la lista oficial. Y toda nuestra gente, nuestro pueblo, no era sujeto de ninguno de esos programas. Entonces, lo que hay que incidir nosotros como organizaciones es que los estados realmente nos consideren en el recojo de datos oficiales para justamente la implementación de políticas desde el Estado, en los servicios de salud, por ejemplo. Mucho en la parte amazónica nosotros tenemos muchas enfermedades que son imposibles de erradicar, como el paludismo, el dengue, etc. Y si no tienen una información oficial cabal de cuánta gente, cuántas personas por comunidad o cómo cuesta trasladarse de un lugar a otro, pues las políticas se quedan solamente en los lugares donde es fácil llegar. Eso pasa en casi en todos los países de las Américas.
Gracias, Nia Tarsila. There is another question for Eleanor, and it says, based on the data given by the panelists, what do you think that will be the EW in Asia can bring about in actions as EW Heal as One? Indigenous Women. That's what EW stands for. Okay, hold on. Based on the data given, what do you think there will be Indigenous women in Asia can bring about in actions for women to heal as one?
That's Ellen.
Sorry, can I have the question again?
Yes, the question is, given the data that you are giving, what would be the actions of Indigenous women in Asia to heal as one? What are the actions to push all concerned states to seriously take appropriate mechanisms to combat coronavirus?
Okay.
Questions, actually.
Yeah. First of all, we've always been talking about data, no? We can states can never have appropriate programs or recovery programs for appropriate recovery programs if they don't have data based on ethnicity. So without this, we will go on hoping and hoping and hoping and recommending, no? And the government just making programs what it thinks will benefit Indigenous women. So we will remain invisible and just one in the just and the intersectionalities of our identities not responded to there. So that's one. States and donors also have to invest on a lot of things like strengthening the health infrastructure, that will include the recognition and strengthening of indigenous medicinal and hearing knowledge, practice and of women, and enhancing partnerships at the community level for health protection and disease prevention. No? It has to invest on food security and livelihoods that recognizes, supports, and contributes to the development of traditional livelihoods, explore other suitable nature-based income sources to discourage migration for labor while reducing population pressure in the urban and industrialized centers. These may include enhanced related local capacities and skills, technology, infrastructure, and services, including access to markets. Um, it should also, states and donors should also look into enhanced educational systems and infrastructures, no? Ensuring that schools with standard and quality infrastructures, equipments, curricula, and teachers are available. It should, instead of all these technologically advanced approaches, it should also look into supporting indigenous peoples led education and respect the schools as zones of peace. This is specifically something that we are recommending to the Philippines, no, where schools, indigenous schools, have been shut down because of allegations of rebellion or siding with an armed group, no. So for indigenous women, there's still a lot of capacity building and conscious efforts to really do documentation, monitoring, and engaging the local and national platforms for SDGs, no. The although a lot of our work has to do with the SDGs, there's been really a little engagement with the spaces, the specific spaces for SDGs in the local and national levels. So I think there's got to be more I think there's got to be more coordination among indigenous women's organizations at the country levels to and at the regional level to consciously look into the links of the current or whatever work we're doing and their link with the SDGs, because after all it's everything is, we can link everything that we're doing to the SDGs.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Helen.
for the moment.
And the last question is for Lucy about what are your recommendations for donors and states for to indigenous peoples and COVID in your region?
My recommendation is to donors and also to even to the governments is to try as much as possible to support indigenous peoples in Africa, because already with a lot of challenges that are there, and we couldn't mention all of them, that this time of COVID is also a time where we have problems with the encroachment of land for indigenous peoples, the issue of natural resources being degraded, the deforestation and so on. And we've also had quite a number of indigenous people facing a lot of problems in terms of environmental climate change and so on. When we had rains, we had people displaced, we had landslides, we have people who lost lives from the indigenous communities, and right now they still have those challenges. So we need to have those communities really put in place. We need to have the policies really implementation to stop in terms of issue of discrimination. I think when people look at the nation, let's also remember those remote areas and where we are. We are very concerned also with the children, and we know very well that when the schools are closed, and now that they are closed up to the year, we are really very worried, because the gender-based violence is not leaving out the small children at homes. We have rape cases for very young kids, and we are even among our organizations, we are developing a child protection policies that we can be able to use as communities, and also look at what the government has, so that we see how we can merge them. And looking at the recommendation that the Asian women also had put in place, they're almost similar, and I really congratulate them for that particular report. And we are still working among indigenous women in Africa through our WhatsApp and our webinars that we have them every other 2 weeks, to be able to listen and to hear what problems people have. This week we are going to, the coming week we are going to have on conflict. We already had on gender-based violence. These are some of the things that we need to look at them very keenly. And we are happy that we have some tools that have already come out for gender-based violence that we are also going to implement and look at how we can train the women to collect more data. We still have a problem in Africa on data. And we want to urge our donors to support us so that the women, the indigenous people themselves, the indigenous women can collect data themselves and be able to bring and let it be recognized. This is very important for us so that we can be able to know what's happening among us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And thank you to all the panelists, the great panelists from the different regions. We are coming to the closing of this session. If there are more questions, please write them in the chat, and we are going to send them to the panelists so that they can contact you or be in contact to give the answers. So right now I would like to welcome to the floor to Teresa Zapeta. Teresa Zapeta is who is the director of FIMI. Teresa Zapeta is a Mayan indigenous woman from Guatemala, and she's currently the executive director of the International Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI. She has a degree in social communication and a master's in public administration. She also has complementary studies in legislative management and local development. Teresa has more than 25 years of work experience in defense of individuals and collective rights of women and indigenous peoples in NGOs, government agencies, and international organizations. Welcome, Teresa, and she's giving us the closing remarks.
Maltio, Shabesh, Kinyahu Nimrutziligut, Shibonhel, Chiohunkifri. Les estoy dando un saludo desde mi idioma maya en este día y agradecer muchísimo a nuestras panelistas. Gracias Lucy, Tarsila, Ellen, por estar con nosotras en este día y por supuesto a Besh por conducir este diálogo. No quiero extenderme, sí quizá reafirmar algunos compromisos y nuestros próximos pasos. Estaba viendo también los comentarios y preguntas de los participantes que nos acompañan y una de las inquietudes es, bueno, ¿y cuáles van a ser los próximos pasos post-COVID? Soñamos que esta pandemia no sea eterna, como todo, pasará, pero ¿qué nos va a dejar después de que pase? Es ahí la importancia de entonces volver a la mirada de los ODS, a la agenda global, porque una de las razones de una agenda global 2030 es justamente superar las inequidades o las desigualdades, el racismo, la discriminación, tal como se plantea, ¿no? De que todas estemos incluidas, y realmente esta pandemia vino a demostrar estas grandes desigualdades, está visibilizando estas exclusiones y por supuesto ha incrementado las exclusiones de las intervenciones de las hermanas. Me gustaría agregar un aspecto que está impactando la vida de las mujeres en todos los ámbitos rurales, urbanos, profesionales, amas de casa, en el campo, y es el incremento del trabajo y de las tareas, no necesariamente responsabilidad de las mujeres, pero está cayendo una cantidad de tareas en las mujeres, desde ser maestras de los hijos en casa, desde atender a los enfermos. Las mujeres están al frente de la atención de la salud de la familia. Y incluso para quienes hemos acompañado casos cercanos, nos damos cuenta que las mujeres son las que dan ese soporte emocional a la familia y las que tienen que estar fuerte frente a una realidad y darle esa fuerza. Entonces, hay toda una parte que para pensar en los próximos pasos, importante retomar la salud, la sanación espiritual, la salud integral de la mujer es importante. Este es uno de los pasos que debemos de atender. En cuanto a las respuestas de los estados, estamos claras a raíz de un diagnóstico que acabamos de hacer como FIMI, recogiendo todas las realidades regionales, y no hay ningún estado que esté respondiendo con una política específica, no hay una acción afirmativa hacia ninguna comunidad, y lo poco que ha habido ha sido esfuerzo, insistencia de los pueblos indígenas. Si, por ejemplo, lo que nos mencionaba nuestra hermana Tarsila, de atención humanitaria, que no resuelve, pero es un respiro. Sin embargo, no hay políticas. Y aquí es donde viene el gran reto de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Los ODS son responsabilidad de los estados. Implica programas, políticas, planes y presupuestos. Y eso es lo que no hay en ninguno de los estados. Los estados reportan avances importantes. Ahora mismo en el foro de alto nivel, los estados que están reportando están diciendo cosas bonitas de lo que han hecho. Sin embargo, no es la realidad. Entonces, ¿cuál es la apuesta para lo que nos viene? Insistir en seguir preparando cuadros políticos de mujeres indígenas que puedan ocupar espacios de toma de decisión. Insistir en que existan programas específicos para atender a las distintas poblaciones, jóvenes, indígenas, personas con discapacidad, de las diversidades, etc. Esto es importante seguir trabajándolo, y aquí es donde viene también para nosotras como organizaciones y redes, cómo vamos a acompañar a las organizaciones en el nivel nacional y el nivel local para hacer este trabajo de incidencia. Ahí tenemos un gran reto. Estamos haciendo nuestros esfuerzos, no son suficientes. Sin embargo, hay que seguir haciendo una apuesta en la transformación de las políticas públicas y en nuestra participación en esas tomas de decisiones, no solo para ser consultados, sino ser tomadores de decisión. Esto creo que es importante. El tercer elemento, es necesario que hagamos un frente colectivo, global o regional para incidir en una estrategia que pueda contribuir en la oportunidad y el acceso a la educación a cantidad de niñas, niños, jóvenes que en esta pandemia están siendo ya no sé cuántas veces excluidas, porque de por sí hay una gran exclusión en la educación, en el acceso a la educación. En este momento, casi toda la educación se está llevando de manera virtual. Las personas, principalmente en las comunidades y las que están en las áreas marginales de las ciudades, de las grandes ciudades, no están teniendo acceso a esa educación virtual. ¿Qué va a suceder? Próximo periodo de sistema educativo, van a ingresar y seguir como que si nada pasó. Sin embargo, alguien preguntaba cómo vamos a medir el impacto de la pandemia en las comunidades y los pueblos indígenas. Aquí va a haber una medición muy clara de este rezago dirigido por el Estado, en donde muchas niñas y jóvenes indígenas se van a quedar sin el acceso a la educación, porque los demás sí pudieron usar una tablet, un teléfono inteligente, una computadora, un televisor para más o menos estudiar, pero el resto no. Entonces hay que hacer un frente para exigir una estrategia, un programa, de manera que podamos tratar de como minimizar esa gran brecha que nos va a quedar después de la pandemia, nos está quedando. Y definitivamente la reactivación económica. Decimos que esta situación económica está impactando fuertemente en los comercios informales que se llaman, mal llamados. Para mí los comercios informales no son más que la muestra de la falta de oportunidades de acceso igualitario a los mercados. Son tan emprendedoras las mujeres como cualquier otro empresario. La diferencia es la oportunidad que se tiene y que los estados tienen políticas para solventar las empresas grandes eso está sucediendo. Se están preocupando por las economías de los estados, pero se están preocupando por las grandes empresas transnacionales, cómo sostenerlas, pero no se están preocupando por sostener la economía del emprendimiento, la economía de la justicia, que es la que llevamos las mujeres todos los días y los pueblos indígenas. Acá hay todo un programa que plantearnos y finalmente invitarnos a todas y a todos a fortalecer nuestros mecanismos organizativos. Nos hemos dado cuenta que en esta pandemia la realidad nos ha sobrepasado. Por ejemplo, queremos llegar a contribuir distintos, incluso donantes que están siendo un poquito más sensibles, están queriendo llegar al nivel local. Ese mecanismo organizativo en un encierro, en una cuarentena, políticas de Estado que no permiten la libre locomoción por obvias razones, no nos está permitiendo lograr llegar al nivel local para estas ayudas humanitarias. Entonces, hasta ahora nos hemos valido de esta buena experiencia que tenemos de trabajar en redes, sin embargo, nos vemos sobrepasadas. Esa es la realidad, nos vemos sobrepasadas. Entonces, un llamado también hacia adentro de nosotros es cómo fortalecer y poner atención en nuestros mecanismos de coordinación, mecanismos organizativos, de articulación y de trabajo colectivo. Con esto termino agradeciéndoles de nuevo su participación, pues la lucha sigue. Las mujeres indígenas, a pesar de este impacto fuerte en nuestras vidas, seguimos siendo agentes de cambio y creemos profundamente en nuestras capacidades para seguir transformando desde nuestra realidad individual, local, colectiva, comunitaria, como a nivel internacional. Nuevamente gracias a cada una de las que estuvo con nosotras en el panel y a quienes estuvieron participando y también presentando sus preguntas. Y muchísimas gracias al equipo de FINI que trabaja intensamente en plena cuarentena, no descansamos y bueno, les debemos a este equipo y a nuestras fundadoras y a todas las redes nuestros 20 años de FINI y seguimos celebrando aún en medio de dolor y de esperanzas. Gracias.
Gracias.